You're not gonna believe this. But I almost told my friends everything last night. Every thought, every fear, every little piece that's been tearing me apart. And then? The words died in my throat. Again. I never realized how heavy silence could be until it became the only thing I carried. People think silence means nothing, an empty space between moments, but mine was the opposite. Mine was thick, like a glass wall I pressed my hands against every time I tried to speak. And behind that glass, all my unsaid thoughts drifted like smoke. I saw them clearly. I felt them burning. But I could never push them through. It happened again last night. Same pattern, same feeling crawling under my skin. My friends asked me the question I always feared the most, is there something bothering you? And as always, I felt that strange moment when everything in me surged toward the surface. The words were right there, not just in my mind, but at the edge of my lips, trembling like something alive that wanted to escape. I felt the pressure inside my chest, I felt my voice almost forming, and yet nothing came out. Only air. It's strange how you can want two opposite things at the exact same time. I wanted to talk. I wanted to spill everything, like finally letting go of some unbearable weight. But I also wanted to disappear, to hide the parts of me that felt too fragile or messy or stupid to show. That battle inside me always ended the same way, silence winning. I tried to explain it to myself later, alone in my room with the lights off and the glow of my phone screen lighting the walls. It wasn't that I didn't trust my friends. I did, more than I trusted myself. But something inside me twisted whenever I imagined saying the truth out loud. What if I sound dramatic? What if they get tired of hearing it? What if I'm bothering them? What if they think I'm weak? Those what ifs repeated in my head until they sounded like a chorus of voices shouting me down. And maybe the worst part was that I didn't fully understand what I was feeling, either. I couldn't label it. I couldn't organize it into something clear or reasonable. It was just this, turbulence. This vague, shapeless heaviness in my chest that shifted and swirled. How do you talk about something you don't even understand yourself? How do you describe a storm if you can't see where it begins or ends? Some nights, when the house was quiet and I was the only one awake, I tried rehearsing what I would say. I whispered it into the dark, hoping that speaking alone might make it easier to speak later. But even then, the words sounded wrong. Too soft. Too forced. Like I was pretending to feel something instead of describing what was actually happening. I hated it. I hated feeling like a stranger to myself. I think the loneliness came from that, not from the lack of people around me, but from the inability to let them see what I was carrying. They laughed with me, spent time with me, checked in on me, and yet I always felt like we were living on two different sides of a half-open door. They could see the shape of my shadow, but not the full outline of me. And every time I failed to speak, the door closed just a little bit more. Walking home today, I replayed last night over and over again. The moment when my friend paused, waiting for an answer. The space between their question and my silence. The way I could hear my heartbeat louder than my own voice, mostly because my voice never appeared. And I wondered, not for the first time, what they must think of me. Not knowing what's wrong. Not knowing why I refuse to talk. Not knowing that I'm always trying, but trying doesn't count when the result is the same. Still, the worst part wasn't their reaction. It was the one I had afterward. The mix of relief and disappointment. Relief that I had avoided vulnerability. Disappointment that I had avoided vulnerability. How is it possible to feel both at the same time? I lay in bed later, staring at the ceiling, feeling that familiar heaviness behind my ribs. And for a moment, just a moment, I imagined what it would feel like, truly feel like, to finally speak. To finally let someone in. To let the words out of my chest and into the world. Would it feel like breaking? Or like healing? I didn't know. And maybe that was the real fear. But something inside me whispered, almost too quietly to hear. This cannot continue forever. And that terrified me even more. I woke the next morning with that same strange, hollow feeling lodged somewhere between my throat and chest. It was the kind of sensation that didn't hurt, exactly, but lingered like a bruise you forget about until you accidentally press on it. The room felt colder than usual, though I knew it wasn't the room, it was me. I moved through my morning routine almost mechanically, brushing my teeth, pulling on clothes, tying my shoes, all while my mind replayed last night's silence on loop. It was ridiculous, I told myself. People forget conversations all the time. My friends probably didn't even think twice about it. And yet, somehow, it stayed with me like a thread I couldn't stop pulling. I walked to work the same way I always did, headphones in, volume low, letting music drown out my thoughts just enough so I didn't drown in them myself. The city was noisy, cars, chatter, footsteps, but all of it felt distant, like it was happening behind a thick wall of glass. I watched people rushing past me, talking on the phone, laughing, complaining, gesturing wildly with their hands, and I felt something bitter twist inside me. How did they do it so easily? How did they just speak? Even when they were angry, or tired, or irritated. Even when they didn't have the right words. They still spoke. Meanwhile, I guarded my silence like it was some fragile treasure I had to protect. When I reached my office, I forced myself into the rhythm of work, typing, replying to emails, nodding through meetings, pretending everything was perfectly fine. Pretending was second nature to me. I could do it with a straight spine, steady breathing, and a voice that convinced even me sometimes. But from the corner of my eye, I kept noticing the tiny, human things that reminded me what I lacked. The way coworkers casually leaned into each other's cubicles to vent about their morning. The way someone sighed loudly about something small, like their coffee being too bitter, and no one judged them for complaining. They just listened, responded, empathized. It struck me how low-stakes vulnerability seemed for others. How safe it was for them to be imperfect. Around lunchtime, my phone buzzed again. A message. From the same friend. You seemed quiet last night. Just checking again. You sure you're okay? The words hit harder than they should have. They were simple, caring, and undeserved. My stomach tightened. I stared at the screen far too long before typing back something dry and effortless. Yeah, just tired again, lol. The lol was the worst part, a fake laugh, a digital mask meant to make everything lighter, smaller, meaningless. I hit send before I gave myself the chance to delete it. But then the unexpected happened. My friend replied almost immediately. You know I'm here, right? Even if you don't know how to explain it. You can still talk to me. My breath caught for a moment. Something in me, something small but real, cracked just a little. It wasn't pressure this time. It wasn't fear tightening around my chest. It was more like warmth. Or hope. The tiniest spark of something I didn't recognize at first. Maybe it was the first moment in a long time when I genuinely felt seen. But even then, even with those words lighting a path toward openness, my instinctive response was the same: shut down, retreat, hide. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't even rational. It was reflex. A deeply carved habit, practiced and perfected over years. I locked my phone, slipped it back into my pocket, and tried to focus on my lunch, though I barely tasted any of it. The rest of my shift went by in a blur. People talked to me, and I responded automatically. I laughed when someone made a joke, nodded when someone complained, contributed enough to avoid suspicion, but all the while that message echoed in my mind: even if you don't know how to explain it, you can still talk to me. Why did that sentence feel so impossible? On the tram ride home, the evening light shifted into that soft, golden shade that makes the world look slightly unreal, like a painting left out in the sun. I watched the reflections in the window. Strangers' faces blending with mine. I thought about the countless moments when I'd wanted to open up, truly open up, only to choke on nothing but air. I thought about how many times I rehearsed confessions in my head, only for my courage to dissolve when it mattered. And I wondered, not for the first time, if maybe I didn't deserve the patience people offered me. If maybe they were wrong for caring at all. The tram stopped near my street, and as I stepped off, my phone buzzed once more. I expected another message from the same friend, but it wasn't. It was a photo from our group chat, the others laughing, joking around, making plans for the weekend. And suddenly, something inside me ached. Not jealousy. Not sadness. Just longing. Longing to feel part of it without pretending. Longing to show them the version of me that suffocated beneath my silence. Longing to believe that maybe, just maybe, if I spoke, I wouldn't break the world around me. But longing wasn't enough. I walked slowly, the weight of unspoken words pressing heavier with each step, and somewhere in that slow walk home, I whispered to myself, too quietly for anyone else to hear: I don't want to stay like this. And for the first time, I meant it. The night fell quietly, too quietly for the chaos that kept spiraling in my chest. I sat on the edge of my bed with the lights off, the room illuminated only by the faint glow of the street lamp outside filtering through the blinds. The world felt dim, muted, as if someone had turned the volume down on everything except the noise inside my own head. That noise, of course, never seemed to fade. It pulsed, echoed, folded into itself, forming new shapes and worries faster than I could untangle them. I replayed the day again, the message from my friend, the way my heart tightened, the way I'd locked my phone as if the screen had burned me. I knew it wasn't normal to fear something so simple. A conversation. A question. A moment of vulnerability. But fear had a strange way of disguising itself as protection. It whispered that silence was safer, that honesty was exposure, that speaking would only make things worse. And stupidly, I believed it every time. I lay back against the pillow, staring at the ceiling as if it might hold the answers I couldn't form myself. I tried to breathe deeply, but every breath felt shallow, like it got trapped just before reaching where it needed to go. That familiar restless pressure crawled beneath my sternum, not pain exactly, but discomfort, unease, like something was trapped inside me, pushing against the walls of my chest, desperate to break out. I whispered into the darkness, why can't I just talk? My own voice startled me. It sounded too small, too fragile, like it wasn't mine at all. I tried to trace the timeline back. When did I become this version of myself? When did speaking turn from something natural into something terrifying? I remembered small pieces, moments from childhood when I learned to keep quiet to avoid trouble, times when I was told I was too sensitive, the conversations where someone sighed or rolled their eyes because I struggled to explain myself clearly. Maybe those moments had been seeds planted long ago, roots twisting deep into the soil of who I was becoming. Maybe every time I silenced myself back then, I was teaching my future self that staying silent was survival. But survival isn't living. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a sound so sudden I flinched. I reached for it hesitantly and saw a notification from the same friend, a simple heart emoji. No pressure. No question. Just a gesture, small but warm, like an open door left ajar. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Not because I didn't want to, but because the moment I thought about replying, my mind flooded with thoughts again. What if they're tired of this? What if I'm only making things more complicated? What if they think I'm ignoring them? What if they think I'm dramatic? What if I disappoint them? What if, what if, what if? My personal prison cell built entirely out of invisible questions. I put the phone back down, face down, as if hiding it could make the world disappear. I pressed my palms to my eyes, trying to quiet the thoughts, but that only made the darkness behind my eyelids swirl in new shapes. My breath hitched. I sat up abruptly, needing air, space, something. I walked to the window and opened it, letting the cold night breeze wash over me. It helped, only slightly, but it was enough to ground me for a moment. Outside, the street was empty. A few scattered leaves drifted across the pavement, and the sound of distant traffic hummed like a background soundtrack to a life I wasn't fully living. I placed my hands on the windowsill, leaning forward as if the cold air might somehow pull the heaviness out of me. But feelings don't leave just because you want them to. If anything, acknowledging them only made them more real. The honesty I couldn't give to others began spilling into my thoughts, even if in silence. I'm tired of this. I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of swallowing everything that hurts. I'm tired of being afraid of my own voice. But even those silent confessions left me trembling. Because every time I admitted the truth internally, it reminded me that changing it meant doing the one thing I feared the most, speaking. I closed the window and let myself fall back onto the bed, staring at the ceiling again. My chest felt tight, but not in a dangerous way, more like a balloon stretched too thin. Like one more breath might finally make it burst. And I wondered, maybe bursting wasn't always destruction. Maybe it could also be release. But release required courage, and courage felt impossibly far away. It was nearly midnight when exhaustion finally pulled me under, but even sleep didn't give me peace. My dreams felt like reflections of reality, voices I couldn't answer, conversations I couldn't finish, friends reaching toward me while I stood behind a glass wall banging silently, hoping they'd hear the desperation I couldn't express. I woke twice, heart racing, throat tight, sweat chilling my skin. Every time, I told myself the same lie, tomorrow will be different. But deep down, I feared tomorrow would be just another loop of the same silence. Still, something about tonight felt like a turning point, even if I didn't understand why yet. Maybe it was the message. Maybe it was the ache. Maybe it was the moment at the window when I whispered truths I had denied for too long. Whatever it was, it planted something small inside me, not hope exactly, but the possibility of it. I didn't know it then, but the next day would begin to crack open the silence I had built around myself. Not through something loud, but through something small. Something unexpected. And something I could no longer ignore. The next morning arrived slowly, like a reluctant confession. The light creeping through my curtains felt softer than usual, diluted, almost hesitant. For a moment I remained completely still, letting the silence of my room settle into my bones. My mind was groggy, scattered, but beneath that fog there was an odd trembling, something subtle, something almost imperceptible, as if the world was holding its breath for me. Or maybe I was holding mine. I moved through my morning in a daze, the memory of last night still clinging to me like damp air. The restless thoughts, the message I hadn't answered, the cold air at the open window, they all lingered in my mind like scenes from a movie played too close to reality. Yet there was also something new, a faint shift deep inside me. Not enough to call progress, not enough to call courage, but enough to make me feel slightly off balance. A small change, like a loose thread at the edge of my silence. When I stepped outside, the air smelled of rain even though the sky was clear. The world looked strangely sharp, colors brighter, sounds crisper, people more defined. It was as if my senses were trying to anchor me to something I didn't yet understand. With each step toward the tram station, I felt the same question circling in the back of my mind: what if I actually try today? The thought terrified me. But it also refused to leave. I boarded the tram, finding my usual spot by the window. The city passed by in a blur of buildings and faces I didn't recognize. I rested my head against the cold glass and let myself imagine what it would feel like to speak honestly. Just once. Just a single moment where I didn't hold back. I pictured myself telling my friend everything, the fear, the self-doubt, the confusion, the words that clung like thorns in my throat. But each mental attempt fell apart before it even began. My chest tightened. My palms felt damp. The familiar panic rose in my stomach like a tide. I shut my eyes and breathed. In. Out. Slow. Careful. But the fear didn't disappear. It rarely did. When I arrived at work, I expected the same numb routine, typing, nodding, pretending. But something unusual happened almost immediately. A coworker of mine stopped me as I walked in. Someone I wasn't particularly close to. Someone who usually kept to themselves. They looked at me for a moment, their expression softer than usual, and said, "You look tired. Are you okay?" The question was simple. Kind. Harmless. But it struck me with unexpected force. It wasn't the words themselves, I'd heard them countless times, but the way they were asked. There was no judgment behind them, no suspicion, no pressure. Just genuine concern. Genuine humanity. And for a brief second, an incredibly brief second, I felt the instinct to answer honestly. But the fear snapped back before I could even open my mouth. I offered a practiced smile instead. Yeah. Just didn't sleep much. They nodded, accepting the answer without pushing further. They moved on. The moment passed. But the impact remained. I sat at my desk, staring at my screen as my thoughts spiraled. My coworker had no reason to care. They barely knew me. And yet they still asked. Still noticed. Still paused. And that simple gesture cracked something inside me in a way I hadn't expected. If even someone distant could show care without judgment, then maybe, impossible as it seemed, my friends weren't secretly annoyed with me. Maybe they weren't waiting for me to fail. Maybe I wasn't the burden I convinced myself I was. The rest of the morning I couldn't shake that thought. It hovered close, like a quiet companion. I moved through tasks mechanically, but my mind kept returning to the sudden realization that maybe people weren't as critical as the voice in my head always insisted. Around noon, we had a meeting, one of those long, tedious gatherings where everyone sits in the same room pretending to care. My mind drifted while people talked. I found myself glancing around the table, watching the small moments others probably overlooked, the way someone nervously tapped a pen, the way another person kept adjusting their sleeves, the way someone else avoided eye contact altogether. It struck me suddenly, painfully, that everyone carried something. Everyone had their own invisible weight. And none of them looked weak for it. Why did I think I would be the exception? The meeting eventually ended, and as I walked back to my desk, I felt that small internal shift grow stronger. It wasn't a breakthrough. It wasn't confidence. But it was recognition that my silence wasn't protecting me. It was isolating me. By the time my shift ended, my thoughts were buzzing with unfinished realizations. I stepped outside into the late afternoon sun, blinking at the brightness. I hadn't planned on doing anything different that day. I fully intended to go home, lie down, and slip back into my familiar pattern of avoidance. But when I reached the tram station, my phone buzzed. A message. From the same friend. Hey. If you're free later, maybe we could call? No pressure. Just want to hear your voice. Something inside me stuttered. My breath caught. It was gentle. It was patient. It was exactly the kind of invitation I always claimed I never received, even though I did. Even though this friend had offered me countless chances before. And suddenly, the shift became a decision. A quiet one. Not a dramatic one. But a decision nonetheless. Maybe tonight. I would try. Just try. Not perfectly. Not bravely. Just, honestly. I had no idea what that attempt would lead to. No idea that this small decision would begin unraveling everything I had kept inside for years. No idea how close I was to breaking and healing. But for the first time in a long time, I felt the possibility of change. The day should have ended peacefully. I should have stepped off the tram, walked home, and quietly prepared myself for that call I promised myself I would try to take. But life rarely follows the script we write in our heads. Instead, something inside me began to unravel the moment I walked through my front door, not in a dramatic explosion, not in a loud breakdown, but in that subtle, invisible way emotions sometimes decide they've had enough of waiting. My apartment was dim, only the dying evening light bleeding through the curtains. I dropped my bag onto the chair and sat on the floor, leaning against the edge of my bed because somehow sitting on the ground felt more honest than sitting anywhere else. My chest felt strangely tight, not in the way panic usually crept in, but in a deeper, heavier way, like the pressure of years was pressing forward all at once, demanding to be acknowledged. I pulled my knees to my chest. My phone lay beside me on the floor, screen dimmed, waiting for a message I didn't want to see and wanted desperately at the same time. For a moment, I imagined what it would be like if I could open up tonight, really open up, and my throat tightened immediately, a visceral reminder that my mind was ready long before my body was. When the phone buzzed, I nearly flinched. It wasn't even a message from my friend, just a random notification, but it was enough to send my heart racing anyway. I stared at the blank wall across from me and tried to breathe slowly, deeply, but every inhale felt like it hit a wall inside my chest. And that's when it happened. I didn't notice the first tear. Or the second. I only realized I was crying when my vision blurred, and I felt a warm streak roll down my cheek. It wasn't the kind of crying I'd seen in movies, no dramatic sobs, no shaking shoulders, no shattered gasps. It was quiet. Almost silent. The kind of crying that seeps out when you've been strong for too long, even though no one asked you to be. I brought a hand to my mouth to keep any sound from escaping, as if I needed to hide even from myself. I hated crying. I hated what it meant, vulnerability, breaking, failure. I hated that it felt like proof that I couldn't handle something as simple as existing. But most of all, I hated how familiar it felt. I cried like someone who'd been holding this inside for years. Everything I'd been avoiding crashed into me simultaneously, the fear of being judged, the fear of being a burden, the fear of disappointing people, the fear of appearing weak. All those fears that lived inside me like ghosts finally decided to speak, loudly, mercilessly. My thoughts spiraled fast. Why can't you talk? Why can't you just say it? They'd listen, but you can't even open your mouth. You're always stuck. You're always silent. They must be so tired of you. Why are you like this? Why can't you be normal? Why can't you just speak, just once? Why are you always so scared? The words inside me felt like a storm. And I was drowning in it. I curled smaller on the floor, my breath uneven, my fingers trembling slightly. I felt pathetic. Weak. Broken. Every negative thought I'd ever had about myself was suddenly louder than my heartbeat. For a moment, I genuinely believed that silence was going to swallow me whole. But then something unexpected cut through the noise. A vibration against my thigh where the phone rested. Not a random notification. This time, it was my friend. Hey. No rush, but I'm home now. Whenever you're ready for that call. I stared at the message as if it were written in a language I barely understood. Not because the words were complicated. But because they felt impossible. Soft. Kind. Patient. Everything I wasn't used to receiving at a moment when I felt so raw. My hand shook slightly as I picked up the phone. The thought of calling felt terrifying. My throat still felt thick. My chest still felt tight. But the idea of continuing to stay silent felt worse. Not better. Not easier. Just, worse. My friend sent another message a minute later. Only if you want to talk. If you just want company, that's okay too. And just like that, something inside me cracked wide open. Not shattered. Not destroyed. But opened. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know if I could say anything at all. But the loneliness in that moment didn't feel permanent anymore. For the first time in a long time, it felt like someone was reaching into the storm I had been drowning in. With my thumb trembling slightly, I pressed the call button. The ringing sound echoed in my ear, steady, slow, strangely comforting. My heart pounded. My breathing hitched. My throat tightened again. And just before the call connected, a single thought slipped through the chaos. Maybe I don't need perfect words. Maybe I just need a beginning. The moment the call connected, I froze. My friend's voice came through the speaker soft, warm, familiar, the kind of voice that always made the world feel a bit less dangerous. But tonight, it also felt like a spotlight pointed at the part of me I'd spent years hiding. Hey, they said gently. Take your time. I'm here. Just those 6 words. 6 small, simple words, yet they struck me like a tidal wave. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out at first. Only a small breath, shaky and uneven, the kind that betrays you even when you try your best to sound normal. I ran a hand through my hair and tried again, forcing a small whisper. Hi. It sounded thin. Fragile. Like a piece of glass that might shatter if touched too hard. I immediately hated the way my voice exposed everything I was feeling even though I wasn't saying anything real yet. But my friend didn't react with confusion or judgment. They didn't ask why I sounded upset. They didn't press. They just waited, patient and steady, letting the silence exist without letting it drown me. I swallowed hard. My throat burned, as if all the unsaid words were scraping their way upward. My hand shook slightly. My chest felt too tight, my breath too uneven. For so long, I had convinced myself that speaking would feel impossible. And maybe it still was. But hiding felt impossible too. Not tonight. Not anymore. My voice cracked on the first syllable. Embarrassment hit me instantly, like a punch to the stomach. I wanted to hang up, pretend the call never happened, crawl back into the familiar safety of silence. I pressed my fingers to my eyes, trying to hold back tears I didn't want them to hear. But before I could panic further, their voice came again, quiet, steady, anchor-like. It's okay. Don't rush. I'm not going anywhere. My breath wavered. Something inside me trembled. Not fear this time, or not only fear. There was something else mixed with it. Something softer. I don't really know how to say it, I finally whispered. That's okay, they said. Then you don't have to know. Just talk. Even if it doesn't make sense at first. A long, shaky exhale slipped from me. I pressed my back against the bed frame, grounding myself, and let my thoughts swirl into something resembling speech. It's just. I can't talk about things, I said slowly, each word a struggle. Not even when I want to. Not even when I'm hurting. And I don't know what's wrong with me. My voice broke at the last word, and I hated it, the vulnerability, the cracks, the fragility. But my friend didn't gasp or pity me. Their tone didn't change. It stayed steady. Nothing's wrong with you. You're just carrying something alone. I closed my eyes. The truth of that sentence washed over me like warm water. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. I always get scared, I whispered. That'll bother people. That'll sound stupid. That'll be a burden. And when someone asks what's wrong, I want to tell them, I really do, but my throat. I placed a hand there, feeling the pressure. It just closes. My friend exhaled softly on the other end, not in frustration, but in empathy. That happens to more people than you think, they said. And it doesn't make you weak. It just makes you human. Human. That word alone made something crumble inside me. Something old. Something that had been holding the door closed for years. My breathing shook harder now, but I didn't mute the call. I didn't hide it. I didn't apologize. For once in my life. I let someone hear the tremor in my voice. I cried earlier, I admitted suddenly, quietly. I don't even know why exactly. I just felt overwhelmed. That's okay too, they replied without hesitation. Crying is not a failure. It's a release. The words settled over me like a blanket, soft, heavy, comforting in a way I hadn't expected. I pressed my forehead against my knees and let myself breathe through the ache. I've been feeling like this for a long time, I continued. Like something is stuck inside me and I can't get it out. And I keep thinking everyone's going to get tired of me. Or annoyed. Or think I'm weak. I don't think you're weak, they said immediately. I think you've been strong for too long. My breath hitched. Hard. Strong. For too long. No one had ever said that to me. Not like that. Not with that gentle certainty. For a moment, I didn't speak. I couldn't. I felt something warm slide down my cheek, and I didn't wipe it away this time. I wasn't sobbing, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, steady tears, the kind that fall when someone finally touches a truth you've hidden inside yourself for years. And then, something miraculous happened. A sentence escaped my mouth without the usual fear choking it back. I don't want to keep everything inside anymore. My friend's voice softened even more. You don't have to. I'm scared, I admitted. I know. But you're trying. And that matters. I let those words sink into the cracks of everything that had been broken inside me. They didn't fix me. They didn't magically erase the fear. But they gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time. Permission. Permission to feel. Permission to speak imperfectly. Permission to be something other than okay. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't suffocating. It was space. Safe space. For the first time, my silence wasn't a wall, it was a pause. A pause before something new. And in that pause, I realized something vital. Tonight, for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Not because the silence returned to suffocate me, but because it felt like I was finally learning what silence could be when it wasn't shaped by fear, gentle, soft, a place to breathe rather than a place to hide. My friend didn't fill the quiet with empty comfort or forced words. They simply stayed. Present. Patient. Unmoving. And somehow, that presence gave me enough courage to keep going. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my sweater. My breathing steadied, not perfectly, not fully, but enough for me to feel anchored in my own body again. I had never noticed how much weight lived behind my ribs until a little of it finally moved, shifted, loosened. It wasn't gone, but it was no longer crushing me. I've been so scared, I whispered into the phone. I know, they replied softly. But you're here. You're talking. That's huge. I let my head fall back against the wall, feeling the coolness of it ground me. For so long, I'd been convinced that speaking would break me open in ways I couldn't control, that if I unlocked even one piece of what I was hiding, the entire structure of myself would collapse. But now that I had finally cracked open, I wasn't collapsing. I wasn't falling apart. I wasn't drowning. I was breathing. Slowly, unevenly. But breathing. I feel like, I tried to put the feeling into words, my hands shaking as I spoke. Like something's been pressing on me for such a long time, and now that I said even a little, it hurts, but it also feels lighter somehow. That's what happens when you finally stop carrying everything alone, they said. It doesn't fix everything immediately. But it makes room for healing. Healing. A word I had never allowed myself to imagine. Healing always felt too big, too distant, too unrealistic, something for others, not for someone like me. But hearing it spoken aloud, directed toward me, made me want to believe in it, even if just a little. I don't know how to do this, I admitted. Talking. Feeling. Letting people in. I don't know where to start. You just did, they replied. You started tonight. A long breath slipped out of me. I didn't realize how tightly I'd been holding it. My body unwound slightly, shoulders dropping for the first time all day. The aching knot in my stomach didn't disappear, but it loosened. And that was enough. I closed my eyes and allowed the truth to surface, not the polished version, not the rehearsed version, but the raw, unfinished truth I had buried under layers of self-doubt. I always thought, if I told people what I feel, they'd judge me. Or leave. Or get tired of me. And I kept thinking I had to be strong all the time, keep everything inside, handle it alone. But it never got better. It just got heavier. A soft hum of understanding came from the other end of the call. You don't have to be strong all the time, they said. And no one expects you to be. You're human. You're allowed to struggle. You're allowed to feel lost. You're allowed to need help. That doesn't make you a burden, it makes you real. Real. Such a small word. But it echoed in me like a revelation. I didn't have to be polished. I didn't have to be perfect. I didn't have to be silent. I could be real. For the first time, my throat didn't tighten at the thought. It loosened, opening just a little, enough for me to speak without fighting my own mind. Thank you, I whispered. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just genuine. You don't have to thank me, they said. I care about you. I want you to be okay. And I'm glad you trusted me with this. My chest clenched, not from fear, but from the overwhelming relief of being understood. Truly understood. The kind of understanding I had always convinced myself I didn't deserve. But tonight proved otherwise. I sniffed softly and let out a shaky laugh. This feels weird, I admitted. Yeah, they said warmly. But new things usually do. We talked a little longer, nothing heavy, nothing forced. Just small things, grounding things. The kind of talk that fills the cracks without widening them. And somewhere in the middle of that conversation, I realized that the world hadn't ended. I hadn't fallen apart. My friend hadn't left. Nothing terrible had happened. In fact, something good had happened. Something small, fragile, but real. When we finally said goodnight and the call ended, I didn't feel the crushing loneliness I usually felt. The room didn't feel as cold, and my chest didn't feel as tight. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, but this time, not searching for answers. Just existing. Just breathing. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel broken for struggling. I felt human. Before I closed my eyes, a thought formed, soft, tentative, but steady. I spoke. I didn't say everything. But I spoke. And that is enough for tonight. Enough to begin. Enough to hope. And somewhere inside me, beneath all the fear and what-ifs, a new voice whispered back. Maybe tomorrow, I'll speak again. Maybe tomorrow, I'll be a little braver. Maybe tomorrow, I'll feel a little lighter. Maybe I can heal. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But slowly, gently, honestly. The way I found my voice tonight. After years of silence. Told me one thing with absolute clarity. This is the beginning. Of finding myself again.